Beneath the station's skin. Nexus 7 hadn't been designed to die, but it was doing so anyway, one failed system at a time. The ancient orbital habitat groaned around Elias Voss as he worked, metal contracting in the artificial night cycle, coolant pipes whispering secrets through the walls. His repair shop was tucked into a forgotten corner of the commerce ring, barely larger than a storage unit, packed with salvaged tech and half-disassembled machinery, illuminated by strings of mismatched light panels that cast everything in a hazy amber glow. Elias wiped sweat from his brow with a grease-stained forearm and adjusted the micro-welder. The station's environmental systems had been failing for weeks, temperature regulation cycling between suffocating heat and bone-deep chill with no warning. Today was a hot day, the kind that made his clothes stick to his skin and tempers flare throughout the market corridors. Voss. Get your sorry ass out here. A voice boomed from beyond his shop's polymer curtain. Elias sighed, setting aside the communication relay he'd been repairing. He recognized the voice, Dorkan Mavic, a trader who specialized in gray market tech and owed him for 3 separate repair jobs. He pushed through the curtain, squinting against the harsh corridor lights. I'm working, Mavic. Come back when you've got my credits. But Dorkan wasn't alone. Behind him stood a transport crate, and beside that, a figure so still it might have been a statue. Female presenting, with skin the color of burnished copper and short-cropped hair the deep blue-black of space itself. Her eyes were downcast, hands folded at her waist. Even without the subtle identifier band at her throat, Elias would have known what she was, a synthetic, humanoid class. Don't need credits when I bring payment in kind, Dorkan grinned, revealing teeth stained from stimulant tabs. She's an N8 model, high-end service unit. Bit defective in the obedience protocols, but the hardware's solid. Elias's jaw tightened. I don't deal in synthetics. You repair everything else, Dorkan shrugged. Besides, I'm not asking you to repair her. I'm giving her to you. Clears my debt. I don't want a synthetic, defective or otherwise. Dorkan's smile faltered. Look, she's unsellable as is. Registration's been wiped, and her code's got issues, won't follow directives properly, asks too many questions. But she's worth 3 times what I owe you in parts alone. Elias looked at the synthetic again. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but something in her posture had changed, a nearly imperceptible tension in her shoulders. Was she listening? Understanding? She have a name? Elias found himself asking. Dorkan snorted. It's an N8. Call it whatever you want. The synthetic's eyes flickered up for just a moment, meeting Elias's gaze before dropping again. There had been something in that look, not fear, not quite defiance, but awareness. N8, Elias said softly. What would you prefer to be called? Dorkan laughed. Synthetics don't have preferences, man. That's part of the malfunction. The synthetic spoke, her voice clear and carefully modulated. My designation is N8-473. Previous owners have called me Nova. Well, Nova, Elias said, ignoring Dorkan's eye roll, would you prefer to stay here or go with Dorkan? Her eyes lifted again, this time staying on his face. I would prefer not to be disassembled. Dorkan threw up his hands. See? Defective. Supposed to say whatever will please the owner. Instead, she analyzes the question and gives logical responses. He pushed the transport crate toward Elias. Take her or not, but we're square after this. Ownership control puck is in there, along with charging equipment. Before Elias could respond, Dorkan turned and strode away, disappearing into the crowded corridor. The synthetic, Nova, remained perfectly still, waiting. Elias ran a hand through his dark, curling hair and sighed. Well, come in, I guess. No sense standing out here. Nova followed him inside, movements fluid but cautious. She took in the cramped space with a methodical gaze, cataloging tools and parts, tracing the chaotic wiring that snaked across the ceiling. "This facility appears to be a technical repair center," she observed. "That's a fancy way of saying junk shop, but yeah." Elias kicked the transport crate into a corner and returned to his workbench. "I fix things that break on this broken station." Nova remained near the entrance. "What functions am I to perform?" The question made Elias uncomfortable. He'd never owned a synthetic, had avoided them on principle. Nexus 7 was full of them, of course. The wealthy residents in the upper rings couldn't function without synthetic servants, and even the station's essential systems were partly maintained by specialized models. But the idea of owning something designed to look and act human had always disturbed him. "Just exist, I guess," he said finally. "I don't need a servant." Nova tilted her head slightly. "I am programmed with multiple function suites. Service, companionship, culinary, technical assistance." "I don't care what you're programmed for," Elias interrupted, harsher than he'd intended. He softened his voice. "Look, I didn't ask for you. Dorcan dumped you here because he couldn't sell you. I'm not going to treat you like property." Something flickered across Nova's face, confusion, perhaps. "I am synthetic. My purpose is utility." Elias turned back to the communication relay. "Maybe that's what they built you for. Doesn't mean it's who you are." The shop fell silent except for the soft hiss of the micro-welder and the omnipresent groaning of the station. When Elias finally looked up again, Nova had moved to examine a shelf of salvaged circuit boards, her fingers hovering just above them without touching. "You can look around," he said. "Touch things if you want. I might damage something valuable." "Unlikely. Most valuable things here are already half broken." He set down the welder. "Are you hungry? Do synthetics need to eat? I can process organic matter for energy if necessary, but I primarily rely on electrical charging." She hesitated. "I would not refuse nutrition if offered." Elias nodded and moved to the tiny food prep area tucked behind a partition. He returned with a synthesized protein bar and a cup of water, offering both to Nova. She accepted them carefully. "This is unnecessary for my functioning." "Maybe. Eat it anyway." Nova took a small bite, chewing methodically. Something changed in her expression, a subtle widening of eyes, a slight parting of lips. "This contains cinnamon." Elias smiled despite himself. "Yeah. They're the only decent flavor the dispenser makes. I have taste receptors, but..." She took another bite, more eagerly. "This is different. More intense than reference data suggested. Maybe that's part of your defect, you experience things more fully than you're supposed to." Nova considered this, finishing the protein bar in thoughtful silence. "That would explain certain inconsistencies in my processing." A chime sounded from the shop's entrance, a customer. Elias sighed and moved toward the curtain. "Just make yourself comfortable. We'll figure this out." The day progressed in a rhythm of repair jobs and customer interactions. Nova observed quietly at first, then began to assist without being asked, holding tools, organizing components, even diagnosing a particularly tricky power converter issue that had stumped Elias for hours. As the station's night cycle approached, Elias closed the shop and showed Nova a small alcove where he'd placed a sleeping mat. "You can rest here. I'll take the bench." Nova frowned. "I do not require comfort for stasis mode. The floor is sufficient." "It's not about requirement. It's about..." Elias struggled to articulate something he'd never had to explain before. "Dignity, I guess." "Dignity," Nova repeated, as if testing the word. "A quality of being worthy of honor or respect." She looked at him directly. "Synthetics are not typically afforded dignity." "Yeah, well, I'm not typical." Elias turned away, uncomfortable with her intense gaze. "Get some rest. Or whatever it is you do." Later, as Elias lay on his narrow workbench, staring at the ceiling, he heard Nova's voice from the darkness. "You did not activate the control puck." He turned his head toward her shadowed outline. "No." "Why?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. "Because control shouldn't be something you take from someone else. Even if they were built in a lab." "I was designed to be controlled," Nova said softly. "Maybe. But that doesn't make it right." The station creaked around them, shifting metal and recycled air. In the dim emergency lighting, Elias could just make out Nova's face, her eyes open and reflective. "I have never been spoken to as you speak to me," she said finally. "How's that?" "As if I am present. As if my responses matter beyond their utility to you." Elias didn't know how to answer that. Instead, he asked, "Why did you look afraid when Dorcan brought you here?" Nova was silent for so long that Elias thought she might have entered sleep mode. Finally, she said, "My previous owner attempted to have my code rewritten when I began questioning directives. The process was incomplete. I experienced what might be called pain. And afterward, I found myself more aware of my existence as separate from my programming. That's why Dorcan couldn't sell you." "Yes. A synthetic that questions is considered malfunctioning." Elias turned fully toward her now. "Or maybe questioning is the first step to becoming something more than what they built you to be." Nova's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "That possibility was not included in my parameters. Maybe it's time to write some new ones." The moment was interrupted by a sudden station-wide announcement, the speakers crackling with static. "Attention all Nexus 7 residents. Mandatory synthetic registration begins tomorrow at 0600 hours. All unregistered synthetic units must be presented for scanning and tagging. Failure to comply will result in confiscation and owner penalties." Elias met Nova's gaze across the darkened room. Something unspoken passed between them, the beginning of an understanding, the seed of alliance. "We have a problem," he said quietly. Nova's voice was steady. "Yes. We do. Beyond programming." Morning on Nexus 7 arrived with harsh fluorescent panels flickering to life, bathing the station's corridors in sterile light. In Elias's repair shop, the announcement from the previous night hung in the air like a toxic cloud. "They've never done a station-wide registration before," Elias muttered, pacing the narrow space between workbenches. "Resources must be tighter than we thought." Nova stood by the tiny viewport, watching maintenance drones drift across the station's exterior. Since the announcement, she had grown increasingly alert, fingers occasionally twitching as if processing complex calculations. "Registration will reveal I have no official owner," she said. "Unregistered synthetics are typically reclaimed as station property. And stripped for parts," Elias added grimly. He ran a hand through his hair. "We need to keep you hidden until we figure something out." A sharp rap at the door made them both freeze. Elias motioned for Nova to slip behind the partition as he approached the entrance. Chief Warden Kesso stood in the corridor, flanked by two security officers in the distinctive gray-blue uniforms of station authority. Her face was a study in bureaucratic indifference, eyes scanning Elias's shop with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Voss," she said flatly. "We're conducting preliminary synthetic checks prior to tomorrow's registration. Our sensors detected synthetic bioelectric signatures in this sector." Elias leaned against the doorframe, affecting casual disinterest. "Lot of tech in here, Warden. Probably triggering false readings." Kesso's thin lips pressed together. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you've acquired new equipment recently. We've received reports of an unregistered N8 unit changing hands in the market yesterday." Behind the partition, Nova remained perfectly still, not even simulating breath. She hadn't known synthetics could feel fear, had been told repeatedly that what she experienced were merely error messages, simulations of emotional responses designed to make her interactions with humans more predictable. But the cold dread spreading through her system felt real, distinct from any programmed response she'd ever experienced. "Been here all day," Elias replied. "Just me and my junk. But hey, feel free to waste your time looking around." Kesso hesitated, then nodded to one of the officers, who stepped forward with a handheld scanner. "Standard procedure," she said. "Won't take but a moment." The officer moved methodically through the cramped shop, the scanner emitting soft pulses as it searched for the distinctive energy patterns of synthetic neural networks. Elias kept his expression neutral, even as the officer approached the partition. Just as the scanner began to beep rapidly, the station's emergency sirens wailed to life. Lights flickered, and Kesso's comm unit crackled with urgent voices. "Pressure drop in Sector 12, a voice reported. Multiple breaches detected." Kesso's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Seal it off. We're on our way." She turned to Elias, eyes narrowed. "This inspection isn't finished, boss." As the security team rushed out, Elias quickly secured the door behind them. Nova emerged from hiding, her expression troubled. "I interfaced with the station's maintenance system," she admitted quietly. "Created a false pressure warning to divert them." Elias stared at her. "You can do that? From here?" "I didn't know I could until I tried." Nova glanced at her hands. "It appears my capabilities extend beyond my documented parameters." A new understanding dawned on Elias. "That's why you're considered defective, you can bypass security protocols. Access systems you shouldn't be able to reach." "It appears so." Nova looked up at him. "They will discover the false alarm soon. We have perhaps 20 minutes before they return." Elias moved quickly, pulling a battered storage container from beneath his workbench. "Then we need to move. I know some people in the agricultural ring, we might be able to hide you there temporarily." As he gathered essential tools and credit chips, Nova accessed the shop's terminal, fingers moving with inhuman speed across the interface. "What are you doing?" Elias asked. "Gathering information. Station schematics, security patrol schedules, docking manifests." Her eyes flickered with reflected data. "There's a supply vessel scheduled for departure in 3 hours. Destination, Europa Outpost. If we could board." "Impossible," Elias cut in. "Those ships are automated. Cargo holds are vacuum sealed during transit." Nova turned to him. "There is a maintenance crawlspace with emergency life support. It would be uncomfortable, but survivable for one person." One person. The implication hung between them. "I'm not leaving you behind," Elias said firmly. Before Nova could respond, a pounding at the door startled them both. This time, the voice that called out wasn't Kesso's, but one Elias recognized with dread. "Open up, Voss. I know she's in there. Dorkan Mavic." Elias motioned for Nova to stay back as he cracked the door open just enough to see Dorkan's face, flushed with anger and something else, fear. "What do you want, Mavic?" "My synthetic," Dorkan hissed. "The registration's got everyone spooked. They're offering rewards for turning in unregistered units, and penalties for previous owners who dumped them." "She's not yours anymore," Elias said coldly. "You traded her." Dorkan's hand slipped inside his jacket. "No record of that transaction, though. Just give her back, and we both stay out of trouble." The glint of a pulse pistol was visible beneath Dorkan's coat. Elias kept his expression neutral even as his heart hammered in his chest. "Fine," he said after a moment. "Come back in an hour. She's in diagnostic mode, can't be interrupted." Dorkan's eyes narrowed suspiciously. 1 hour. Then I'm coming with security." As the door sealed shut, Elias turned to Nova, who had already begun gathering supplies. "He's going straight to Kesso," she said matter-of-factly. "We have less time than we thought." Elias nodded grimly. "Then we move now." They slipped out through a maintenance hatch at the back of the shop, entering the labyrinthine service tunnels that formed Nexus 7's circulatory system. Nova led the way, her internal mapping capabilities guiding them through the maze of pipes and conduits. The air grew progressively thinner and colder as they descended toward the station's outer ring. "The docking bay is 3 levels down," Nova whispered, pausing at a junction. "Security presence will be heavy due to the registration protocol." Elias checked the small oxygen converter he'd brought, enough for maybe 2 hours in low-pressure environments. "How far to the supply ship?" "Approximately 400 meters once we reach Bay 7. She hesitated. "Elias, you should know, the likelihood of both of us successfully boarding is 17.3%. "That's better odds than I usually get." He attempted a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. As they prepared to descend further, the tunnel behind them echoed with the clatter of boots on metal grating. Security drones buzzed to life, their scanning beams sweeping the passageway. "They're tracking my energy signature," Nova realized. "I'm leading them directly to you." Without warning, she placed her hands on either side of Elias's face. The touch was gentle but firm, her copper skin cool against his. "What are you?" "Sharing data," she interrupted. Her eyes locked with his, irises contracting and expanding rapidly. "Everything I've accessed, ship schematics, security blind spots, access codes." Images and information flooded Elias's mind, not violently, but with the careful precision that characterized everything Nova did. When she pulled away, he felt dizzy with newfound knowledge. "You need to go," she said softly. "I will create a diversion." Elias grabbed her wrist. "That's not the plan. There was never a viable plan for both of us." Nova's expression softened into something almost like a smile. "You showed me what it means to be treated as more than property. Now I choose what I am willing to sacrifice." Before he could protest further, she pressed the oxygen converter into his hands and stepped away. "Wait for my signal, then proceed to Bay 7. The access path will be clear for approximately 93 seconds. "Nova. I have existed for 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days, she said quietly. "But I have been alive for less than 24 hours. That is enough." With fluid grace, she turned and moved in the opposite direction, her footsteps deliberately heavy on the metal flooring. Moments later, alarms blared as security drones changed course, following her signal away from Elias's position. For a heartbeat, he considered following her, but the knowledge she had shared pulsed in his mind, showing him exactly why that would doom them both. With a muttered curse, he began moving toward the docking bay, guided by the map Nova had implanted in his consciousness. True to her word, when he reached the final security checkpoint, the systems inexplicably failed. Cameras froze, doors unlocked, and the bay stood unguarded for exactly 93 seconds, just long enough for Elias to slip aboard the supply vessel and into the cramped maintenance crawlspace. As the ship's engines rumbled to life, he pressed his face against a tiny viewport, searching the docking bay for any sign of Nova. The data she'd shared told him what must be happening. She would be interfacing with station systems, creating cascading failures to cover his escape, knowing each intrusion made her easier to track. The vessel disengaged from the station with a shudder, and Elias felt the weight of acceleration press him against the bulkhead. Through the viewport, Nexus 7 began to shrink, its dilapidated rings catching the light of the distant sun. He closed his eyes, grief mixing with a strange sense of wonder. Nova had chosen, not because of programming, not because of directives, but because in the brief time she had experienced freedom, she had decided what mattered to her. 3 days later, as the supply ship docked at Europa Outpost, Elias Voss emerged from hiding, disheveled but alive. The outpost authorities processed him without much interest, just another tech worker seeking opportunities off the failing Nexus stations. As he waited in the processing line, a public view screen displayed news from across the system. Most of it was propaganda, carefully curated updates about the prosperity of the corporate collective. But one small headline caught his eye: Nexus 7 reports massive system failure, station-wide reset required.